weeks. And I know there are still a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of uncertainties around, what's really going to be happening as far as brick and mortar strategy. We're starting to see reopenings in China. People are starting to talk about reopening strategy in the US, what that's going to look like. So what kind of conversations are you having right now? I guess that's really the big question. What's rising to the top for all of the retail executives that you're speaking with right now?
For sure. I mean, safety measures are definitely top of mind and what everybody's prioritizing in this first phase of opening. And, you're seeing some that are doing it within the US and Texas, for example. I know Simon Malls just kind of put out a list of how they're going to phase it over basically the next week in different cities and across the country. So you're starting to see that happen. Most of them are really leaning into a BOPIS environment. So they're thinking, how do we have a very low touch environment? We kind of tap into our store's inventory and fulfillment, and but we keep safety as a top priority. They're really, focusing on the right messaging, the right signage to implement, and then how do you handle that staffing modification for an environment where maybe you just have somebody front of house, somebody back of house, and kind of somebody at the door. So that's really what people are prioritizing in this first phase.
Yep, got it. And I know that for Simon, for example, kind of had the chance to dig into their measures, what their approach is going to be. And then I noticed that there's this need to give the customer a bit more control over their experience, right? Like, people can take their temperature if they're so inclined, giving people options, I guess, to not only have confidence that the environment that they're going to is safe, but that they're safe for the environment too. You know what I mean? So it's definitely an interesting balance as far as the utility side, like you said, with BOPIS, curbside, and then the, I guess, high touch personal measures that, the stores are going to have to be thinking about in the short term to go through.
Absolutely. And you're seeing the ones that are allowing customers come in, they're either doing limited occupancy, like you're seeing in, grocery stores and stuff, but others doing appointment-based shopping. So that's another way that they can kind of control the environment a bit. And a lot of those are requiring masks. And if the consumer doesn't have one, the brand will provide one. So if they're having to come into that close of contact, you're seeing that. I think temperature checks are probably the trickiest of it. And, when you think of like a mall group, it's like, do you have somebody do a temperature check when they come through the main entrance and then again for every single store? And how could you enforce that? How could you regulate that? So I think that's a really tricky one. I think there's still not full adoption of everybody wanting to put on a mask. So that's probably the second trickiest. But I do think a lot of brands are thinking, to keep both sides, both the employees have to wear them, and then having the consumers if they're entering the space.
Yeah, and I guess it's one thing to look at it through the lens of a mall developer. I mean, the retailer can only have so much say of what happens in that larger environment. But you've talked about, some of the measures that brands are taking within their store environment or are thinking about taking to ensure that, their strategy is scalable and adaptable for the long term, especially around, store layout, even the materials that are being used. And that's what I found to be especially fascinating. So I'd love for you to get into that a little bit.
Sure. I think right now it's so early. It's like a lot of analysis around how many of these are just temporary Band-Aids and how much is it going to cause, create long-term changes that are needed. So a lot of it, I think, is like, what is the lens should be, what's the shift in adoption, right? So gloves and masks and temperature checks are temporary.
Right.
Because we're going to find a vaccine, right? This is going to get better and things are going to feel safe again. But the new habits that are being formed now, because everybody's forced to transact through their phone or through a laptop, and you're seeing people adopt, they're shopping groceries before, and that was an underpenetrated category, or they're feeling comfortable with BOPIS or curbside, order ahead, what have you, whatever format of that it is. And so that's probably not going to go backwards. You're going to see a mix where people still want to go to a store, but they're going to know that those seamless fulfillment opportunities exist, and they're going to expect that fluidity going forward. So when you think of a store layout and how you optimize for different customer journeys, it's going to have a little bit of a modified lens in the longer term. So how do you account for different shoppers, one who wants to be able to order ahead and get in and out and pick up their item, one who might want to pick up their item, try it on, and then get in and out, one that still wants to be discovery based. So, we're going to have to think through all of that, because you have to balance out what makes what makes curbside and all of that effective is that they're optimized and they run, like a well-oiled machine. So how do we create an environment where they can be serviced in a very efficient way, but then the others can have that surprise and delight and that, more discovery-based journey if they want to?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of factors. I'm sure a lot of it comes down to the brand, but there's also a persona layer, right? Understanding who your different shopper personas are. Where do they fall into those different types of categories? Are they more, efficiency based, like let's get in and out as much as possible? Do they like the tactile or the environmental component of going to the store? I know I kind of miss it right now. But also the deep analytics of it, right? Like what days are they likely to come into the store? Sure. Where is peak traffic? So I guess there is a bit of a need for tech, right? To be able to track all of that data. So, what are the implications there? Because I feel like right now we're having so many conversations around the health and safety, but at the end of the day, tech is still the connecting point to kind of give you that intelligence that you need, right?
Absolutely. I think it's more important than ever now, because we can't rely on historical data. We are going to have to always be learning in the environment. So, you want to have solutions where you can tap into that camera vision. We have a number of tech vendors that we favor and are talking through with on this, because what you're seeing is some makeshift solutions to it right now. We'll look at the fire code, we'll divide by 2, and that's how we'll determine what occupancy needs to look like. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't account for actual customer flow and journey, interactions with the store associate. Does the person first come in and do they hang out in section A or section B the longest? And what paths are they taking? And how do we optimize that flow? You can't tell that just from kind of crude measures of let's just take this code and divide by 2.
Right.
So, and it doesn't account for how those traffic patterns ebb and flow throughout the week. So I think it's even more important to layer that in now than ever as you're rethinking store design in the future and just optimizing it. And I do think you're going to probably see as a priority, before you start to see new stores open, you're going to see those redesigns happening, right? Because people need to kind of test it out. And just also, what's the need of front of house to back of house, and how does that shift potentially if we have a store that's serving as a fulfillment center in addition to an experiential environment? And you're only going to be able to get those determinations in an accurate way with statistical data.
Yeah, now that you bring it up, it's absolutely true, because if your store becomes a key hub for fulfillment, for example, that has a pretty big impact on the real estate that you do have. And sometimes, part of the appeal of the brand is that their store experience is light, airy, not super cluttered, but if you're going to fulfill these orders, you need to have a lot of inventory available. So I guess kind of making that distinction between the front and back of the house is really important. But the other thing I did want you to dig a little bit into that I found absolutely fascinating from our last conversation is even, materials that you're going to be using to create the store experience, the store environment. Looking at, what is the most safe for visitors. So why don't you get into some of those decisions? Because I feel like people don't realize how deep some of this goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're still doing our own discovery and research around this because, what's the filter really? So most people are talking right away about copper being antimicrobial, and can we put that on more surfaces? And then you start to ask yourself, well, why hasn't that been happening? Is it cost? Is it tough to implement? How do we work that in? So that's one that's on the list. Silver has been another one that's been brought up. So you're kind of thinking from a design standpoint, how do we work that in? And the other question is, how much do we are we able to interweave sustainability still in all of this? Because that has been a top priority for a lot of brands to be leaning into, and environment being top of mind. So, I think there's a lot of convergence happening. Like, how do we have these safer surfaces? How do we maintain our initiatives towards sustainability in the future? And what's the right mix? And how do we offset that with cost? So we're definitely in early stages of evaluating all of that. And we've definitely been putting together some mood boards of like, how can we integrate copper, and how does that work? And is that going to be one of the new trending materials when we start to see, the next group of trends for materiality for store design? But I think in the meantime, what people are trying to do too is just how do we create a little bit more contactless experiences until we kind of figure out the materiality of things. So, for example, not everybody's going to be able to automate their doors upon entry. That's a pretty big cost, takes permits and what have you. But maybe we put in foot handles to open the door instead of, hand handles to open the door. And that's a way to create a lower touch environment. So it's not necessarily leaning into materiality of things, but just kind of rethinking how we affiliate touch and making it not on hands.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up contactless as a principle that extends past fulfillment, because I feel like everyone's talking about curbside and all that great stuff, which is fantastic, because I feel like it's finally reached the tipping point, and the level of conversation that it truly deserves. But, contactless extends far beyond that, and different layers of the experience. So like you said, the handles, and I know we even talked about, the fitting room experience, and, part of our dig into what the future of brick and mortar is going to look like is what role is tech going to be playing in all of this in the long term, right? Because I know, sure, of course, we've been speaking about, the tech-enabled store, the Rebecca Minkoffs of the world that really went the extra mile. But what role can tech play in a scalable way to kind of make that contactless experience a reality? I know we've talked about the nuance of like, well, I mean, you may not want touchscreen because people may not want to engage with it. So, there's a lot available right now, right? So, what is kind of rising to the top as exciting or as an opportunity right now?
Sure. Yeah. There's like multiple layers as the tech that is just kind of like an enabler of conversion, like at the checkout. And I think that's for sure kind of a priority that you're going to see implemented because of this forced adoption of we pay with our phones now, right? And we're not so reliant on cash. And so that's probably going to be a top priority of what gets integrated. And it's going to cause, store designers and brands and retailers to rethink the whole cash wrap experience. Like, what does that look like? How much does it mirror the Apple Store versus a mix of the two? Do we still need packaging for the product and, bag and tissue paper and all of that? Like, so how do we meld those two together? So I think cash wrap's going to be a big one. The dressing room's a really tricky thing at this stage. I think AR would account for it a bit. I don't know that everybody still feels depends how sophisticated the tech partner is. I think a lot of those technologies have gotten stronger where the color translation's more accurate and the body fit's more accurate and, but it's still something that's probably more intuitive and a good fit for beauty. And I still think has a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to fit for clothes. But I do think that there's going to be more attention towards AR and how could we layering it in an even more like delightful way. I think that with the screens, touch for sure. I mean, those surfaces are some of the dirtiest things that exist. And you're seeing some makeshift ways for people to work around it. Like I was at Walgreens this past weekend and they just have like a canister of Q-tips. And you don't have to touch the screen. Just take your Q-tip, touch, sign, and then dispose of it. So what's the evolution of that? Because we're probably not going to hand out Q-tips forever, but it's a low-cost way to test it. But like, people are selling copper keys. Like, do you have a key that you shop with now? And that's how you touch surfaces. And like, how to recondition behavior and then touchscreens can still work. I think the endless aisle experience of kind of those touchscreens might be even more important if we're kind of rethinking merchandising on the floor and we want less product on the floor so that they can be more spread out in area or spaces. Like how do we connect? Like this is our full category of inventory, not just the stuff that you see on the floor. If it becomes accessible from a pricing standpoint, I could see kinetic technology making a lot of sense, where it's through body sensors that a screen is responding to me and not so reliant on touch. But I think what's happening is you kind of need a lot of the ecosystem to come together, because a lot of those technologies require a little bit of heavy lifting kind of to be implemented, right? So there's the cost of it, which the good part now is a lot of the cost evaluation has the question mark of, will consumers adopt this? Well, consumers are adopting it now because like they're forced to. So we can check the box as brands and retailers and consultants, like, okay, consumers will do it. So now they're going to expect it. So now we got to integrate it. And if the tech vendors can work more closely with brands to be able to implement it in a seamless way that doesn't take so much heavy lifting, like how do we work together in creating the right assets? How do we implement it from an IT standpoint? You know, I'm seeing some vendors doing like, we'll give it to you for 3 months just so you can get it up and running and see how it works. And then we'll start charging you, you know, a monthly fee after that. So a little bit it's going to be on the onus of the whole ecosystem coming together. But I think the payments and cash wrap will be a priority. Dressing rooms will have to be figured out. And it's interesting to see how much of that will be reliant on augmented reality or not. So it limits the amount of things that you actually have to put on your body. And then I think it'd be interesting to see if kinetic technology can happen in an affordable way. If not, maybe we do all shop with those copper keys to touch surfaces.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely fascinating to see the evolution of tech in the store, because for so long it was based on, you know, how immersive of an experience can you create for the brand? You know, things like customization, personalization, you know, the added surprise and delight service, you know, being able to like ping a store associate to get more information or get, you know, a new product in a different size. But now it's kind of taking a step back. It's focusing on how can we serve our customers' immediate needs in the best way possible, in the safest way possible. So it's almost like going back to fundamentals or going back to basics for tech, which is very interesting. So I mean, only time will tell what kind of path the industry ends up going on, but it's definitely interesting for sure to see us kind of look at technology through a more practical and realistic lens for sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's most successful when it's purposeful. So it's kind of good that we're using that lens, but that doesn't mean it has to be at the sacrifice of it being experiential. Because everything we talked about, you know, is an experience for the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, then we talked about a lot of, you know, emerging trends, possibilities, opportunities. I guess the big question is, you know, what steps should store designers, you know, store ops folks, you know, what should they be thinking about as they look at this through a short-term lens and a long-term lens? I mean, how can they best determine their path forward? Because really that's at the heart of what we're trying to provide for everyone, you know, from a content perspective. And you're always so great at providing that strategic point of view. So, I mean, what can we break down for them?
I mean, realistically, they should plan on a phased approach. And phase one, safety is going to be top of mind, but I would do it with the caveat is it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice brand. So I think that's the balance in this phase. I think, you know, a lot of people are leaning in just like very direct messaging so there's no confusion. And I think you could do that in a way where it still feels good, as much as it can feel good. You know, I think you have to, how do we make people feel safe without it feeling alarming? Is something that's really important right now, because if a customer walks away from their interaction with you feeling like, ooh, that felt scary, that felt a little bit wrong, they are going to hesitate before they go back again, right? So how do we balance that out? And I think that you know, they should be doing a lot of internal role playing within their own teams and kind of do those scenario analysis and say, this is the journey you're going to take. This is how we're going to message you. How does that feel? You know, and I think that I think people would appreciate we're not making fun or being like taking it lightly what the situation is, but we're still remembering that it's an experience at the end of the day. So what does that message look like when they first pull into the parking lot? If you're having curbside, you know, what are you saying on the window? Is there some sort of little surprise and delight you can give them with their pickup? You know, just like a takeaway, a message, something inspiring, uplifting, whatever it is. Just think through the touch points that still exist. and how can you communicate with them from your brand lens. And then I think the second phase is going to be, not everything is going to be curbside forever. So as people start entering space, what does that look like? And how do we rethink, the prioritization of the merchandise that lives on the floor? How do we lean into aspects of storytelling that don't rely so much on touch maybe, but still feel immersive in a positive way? How do we think about lighting? How do we think about sound? How do we think of those elements that can still feel soothing and good, that we could layer in? And I think that, windows are one of the most powerful storytelling. And a lot of times, visual merchandising teams aren't necessarily what's prioritized in these times. But I do think that, that's probably a really important thing right now. And it doesn't have to be refreshed every week. But even if it's on a monthly basis, even if it's curbside, like that's your three-dimensional moment that you could still give people. What messaging are you putting there to kind of communicate from your brand lens in the space? And then it's layering in that technology for the in-store as well, and kind of thinking through the implementation of that. And if it's things like kinetic technology and stuff, then you really should be thinking about what are the right creative assets that you need to start preparing so that those experiences feel as holistic as possible.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because I feel like every step of the way too, they're going to get customer feedback. They're going to get that intelligence so they can determine, okay, we thought maybe, something a bit more, high touch was the right move from a tech perspective, but, people were a little leery to engage with, the touch screens with the Q-tip, like you were referring to earlier. So maybe that's not the right approach. So I think now is a great time to go through each step or each point in the process and take a hard look. Is this really what our customer wants? Because now more than ever, I mean, we're facing changing customer behaviors, shifting expectations, probably to an extent, right? I mean, just based on how we're forced to behave now. So there is going to be a bit of a learning process, I think. Even people who thought they knew who their customers were and how they behaved. I mean, I think there's going to be some surprises, even for people who are the most in tune with their shoppers.
For sure. I mean, everybody has to have that learn fast, digest, iterate, be nimble kind of mentality in this stage. And to your point, I think consumers know that we're going through a process of this, so we will be somewhat accepting to those quick and dirty learnings, like do Q-tips work, or how do I feel about distancing and stuff. But at some point, we are going to also expect it to feel better. So we need to be able to take those learnings and integrate the ones that feel like they're necessary long-term, and just be able to iterate as efficiently as possible with the data.
Yep. Absolutely. Data at the end of the day. Melissa, this has been a fantastic conversation. A lot of great takeaways, nuggets of wisdom for everyone watching. But before I let you go, I mean, obviously you have such a wealth of insight, such great experience, and you're a fantastic source, I think, as we go through this journey as an industry. So I know you have a new podcast now. You're always writing, on LinkedIn. So where are the best channels for people to follow you and, of course, get more fantastic tidbits from you?
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for that. We launched Retail Refined. So that comes out every Tuesday. And my main focus is bringing on tech vendors. So either the founders or somebody from the founding team, talking through everything from analytics to experiential tech and, how we look at that in the future and the new norm. So that comes out every Tuesday. And then you could follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter is probably the best, at Mel's Styles or at Lioness Group.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. I wanted to make sure we name drop the podcast a little bit, because I know tech was a big part of that. So that's a great source for everyone watching if you're looking for new ideas or even new companies to possibly partner with. So Melissa, as always, it's a pleasure. Again, such great insight. So thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks everyone out there for watching. Take care.